One hero's corpse was shrunk down and mailed in a matchbox. Another was shattered like glass because a villain tricked him into becoming breakable. An entire team was systematically hunted and killed because editorial wanted to pretend the diverse era never happened. One hero was introduced as someone else's disguise and then forgotten for 30 years, and a girlfriend was turned into salt in front of the man who loved her, using his own powers. DC has a pattern, and it's not subtle. When they need someone to die, someone to be erased, or someone to suffer for another character's storyline, they reach for the same roster every time. Ryan Choi. DC Comics killed one of their only Asian American superheroes and mailed his corpse to a villain in a matchbox, and I need you to understand that's not a metaphor. That's the actual plot of the comic. To understand how this happened, you have to look at what Ryan Choi represented and why that made him expendable. Ryan debuted in 2006 with his own solo series written by Gail Simone, inheriting the Atom mantle from Ray Palmer. He was a physics professor from Hong Kong who'd immigrated to America, taken over Palmer's position at Ivy University, and received the size-changing technology that makes the Atom unique. Simone wrote him as brilliant and funny and distinctly Asian American, not a martial arts stereotype, not a tech genius cliché, just a guy trying to figure out superheroics while grading papers. The series ran for 25 issues and gave him a full supporting cast, his own rogues gallery, and even a love interest named Giganta. Ryan joined the Justice League. He appeared in major crossovers. For 4 years, it felt like DC was actually building something that would last. Then, in 2010, DC published Titans, Villains for Hire, and in the very first issue, Deathstroke's new team needed to prove they meant business. Their first mission was breaking into Ryan Choi's house and murdering him. The whole team attacked at once: Deathstroke, Cheshire, Tattooed Man, Cinder, and Osiris. Ryan fought back, but 5-on-1 against assassins isn't survivable. At one point, his girlfriend walked in during the fight, and Deathstroke actually paused the murder so she wouldn't see. She left. They finished the job. Then they shrunk his corpse, put it in a matchbox, and mailed it to Dwarfstar, the villain who'd hired them. This follows a pattern in how publishers establish villain credibility. They sacrifice someone readers care about, but editorial doesn't need. 4 years of character development, 25 issues of solo adventures, Justice League membership, all reduced to a prop designed to show how edgy the new Titans were. Behind the scenes, the writer claimed Ryan's death would have major repercussions. Those repercussions consisted of Ray Palmer being sad for approximately one storyline before everyone moved on. Ryan came back eventually through comic book logic about his consciousness surviving in the microverse. But the message had already been sent. One of DC's few Asian American heroes existed just long enough to be killed for a white villain's credibility, and his body was mailed like a package. The controversy wrote itself because the math was impossible to ignore. Vibe. Before the CW turned him into one of television's most beloved heroes, Vibe was a punchline, and DC killed him because they were embarrassed he existed. Paco Ramon debuted in 1984 as part of Justice League Detroit, which remains the most mocked roster in League history. To understand why DC created him and then destroyed him, you have to understand what the company was trying to accomplish with that era. Aquaman had disbanded the satellite-based Justice League because he was tired of part-time heroes treating membership like a hobby. He rebuilt the team in a Detroit bunker with 4 newcomers: Vixen, Steel, Gypsy, and Vibe. Paco was a breakdancer from the streets of Detroit with vibration powers and an accent so thick it hurt to read. He said things like, "Chew got it, Holmes," in 1984 comics, clearly written by people who had never met an actual Hispanic person. The character was a walking stereotype wrapped in parachute pants, and DC knew it. Readers definitely knew it. Vibe became shorthand for everything wrong with the Detroit era: gimmicky, embarrassing, and desperately trying to be street in ways that aged like milk left in the sun. So when DC decided to erase the Detroit League in 1987, Vibe was obvious cannon fodder. In Justice League of America, Annual Number 2, Professor Ivo sent androids to hunt down League members one by one. Vibe got cornered alone, and the android beat him to death. He was about 20 years old, though they never established his exact age because nobody cared enough to write it down. This follows a pattern in editorial cleanup, where diverse characters created during experimental eras become the first casualties when publishers want to restore traditional status quo. The death was barely mourned in-universe. Other heroes moved on. Vibe became nothing more than a footnote about why the Detroit era was bad. But then something unexpected happened. The CW's Flash and Arrow shows brought Vibe back as Cisco Ramon. Same powers, same heritage, zero breakdancing stereotypes. Carlos Valdez played him as the heart of Team Flash for 9 seasons, And suddenly, Vibe was beloved by millions. DC noticed and gave him a new 52 reboot that pretended the original characterization never existed. The guy they killed because he was embarrassing became one of their most popular TV characters. Comics Vibe stayed dead for over 25 years, while TV Cisco got more development in one season than Paco received in his entire existence. The redemption came too late for the original, but it proved what Vibe could have been if anyone had bothered to write him as a person instead of a punchline. Amazing man. Will Everett III had one of the most powerful legacies in DC history. His grandfather marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and personally captured his assassin. DC killed Will by tricking him into turning into glass and shattering him like a cheap vase. To understand why this death was so disrespectful, you have to understand who the Everett family was in DC's universe. The original Amazing Man, Will Everett Sr., was a 1936 Olympic athlete who couldn't find work because of Jim Crow laws. He ended up as a janitor until the Ultra-Humanite kidnapped him, and experiments gave him the ability to absorb the properties of anything he touched. Touch steel, become steel. Touch diamond, become diamond. He joined the All-Star Squadron during World War II and fought Nazis while America was still segregating its own military. After the war, J. Edgar Hoover outed his secret identity. His family received death threats. His nephew was murdered by racists in Mississippi during the Civil Rights era. Will Sr. responded by becoming one of the most important civil rights figures in DC's fictional history, leading marches, quelling riots in Detroit, and personally capturing James Earl Ray after King's assassination. DC established him as the third most important person in their universe's civil rights movement, right after King and Malcolm X. His grandson Will III inherited both the powers and the legacy. He joined the Justice League at Wonder Woman's invitation and fought alongside Captain Atom's Extreme Justice team. The Everett family had earned their place in DC history through sacrifice and service across multiple generations. Then in Starman number 38 from 1997, the villain Mist attacked a group of heroes that included Amazing Man. She tricked him into mimicking glass, then shattered his body into pieces. This follows a pattern in how legacy characters get discarded. The weight of their history doesn't protect them when a writer needs a dramatic death. Will Everett III, grandson of a civil rights icon, Justice League member, and inheritor of a legacy built on fighting injustice, died because a villain was clever about material science. 3 generations of heroism reduced to a visual gag about what happens when you break a window. His cousin Marcus Clay eventually took up the mantle. But Will III's death remains one of DC's most disrespectful moments. The Everett family history screamed importance, and DC treated him like he was disposable anyway. Justice League Detroit. DC created their most diverse Justice League roster in 1984. By 1987, they'd killed or traumatized almost everyone on it. And the pattern of who survived tells you exactly how DC valued these characters. Here's how Justice League Detroit happened. Aquaman disbanded the satellite team and rebuilt the League in a Detroit bunker with Martian Manhunter, Zatanna, Elongated Man, and 4 newcomers. Vixen, an African fashion model with animal powers. Steel, a reluctant cyborg. Gypsy, a teenage runaway with illusion abilities. And Vibe, the breakdancer we already covered. For 3 years, this was the Justice League. Not the iconic 7, not the satellite-era Legends. A scrappy team operating out of a Midwest basement, featuring more heroes of color than any previous League roster in DC history. Then editorial apparently decided this was embarrassing. The cleanup happened fast. Professor Evo's androids systematically hunted down Detroit members one by one. Vibe died first, beaten to death while cornered alone. Steel was critically wounded and left on life support for years until Despero found his comatose body and ripped him apart piece by piece. The bunker was destroyed. The team disbanded in disgrace. This follows a pattern in how publishers handle experimental eras they want to forget. The new characters become acceptable losses, while established favorites get protected. Vixen survived but spent years in limbo. Gypsy survived but watched her parents get murdered by Despero. Meanwhile, Martian Manhunter, Zatanna, and Elongated Man were all fine because they had pre-existing fan bases DC wasn't willing to alienate. Behind the scenes, Jerry Conway, who created most of these characters, didn't plan for them to die. That was an editorial decision. The higher-ups wanted the Detroit era erased, and the heroes of color were the ones who paid the price. The veterans walked away unharmed. The diverse newcomers were massacred. When DC wanted to restore the League's prestige, they did it by destroying the characters who'd made the team different. Bloodwynd. Some heroes get killed. Bloodwynd got something arguably worse. He was introduced as someone else's disguise and then forgotten for 30 years. In 1992, writer Dan Jurgens added a mysterious new member to the Justice League named Bloodwynd. His powers came from a blood gem created by his enslaved ancestors to kill their brutal master. The gem had been passed down through generations until it reached a modern descendant who used its magic to fight evil. It was an incredible origin, a black superhero with powers literally forged from the suffering of enslaved people who'd turned oppression into supernatural resistance. But there was a problem. For his entire initial run, Bloodwynd wasn't actually Bloodwynd. Jurgens revealed that Martian Manhunter had been mind-controlled into believing he was Bloodwynd and had been impersonating him the whole time. The real Bloodwynd was trapped inside his own gem. When the League finally freed him, readers realized they'd spent months getting attached to a character who was actually John Johns in a costume. This follows a pattern in how black characters sometimes exist as vessels for other characters' stories rather than having their own. The real Bloodwynd joined the team afterward, but the damage was done. Readers didn't know who he actually was. Everything they'd seen was Martian Manhunter. His personality, his relationships, his heroic moments all belonged to someone else. Bloodwynd was a stranger wearing his own face. He stuck around briefly before quietly leaving the League and vanishing into obscurity. Occasional background appearances, a mention here and there. No solo stories, no character development, no answers to basic questions like what his real name was or what he did when he wasn't being impersonated. DC created a black superhero with one of the most historically resonant origins imaginable, and immediately made him a plot device for a white-passing alien's identity crisis. Then they forgot he existed. He's been condemned to hell in recent comics. Still no solo story. Still no real exploration of who he is. The character born as a fake has never been allowed to become real. Gehenna. Jason Rusch was the first Black Firestorm. DC celebrated this milestone by having his girlfriend turned into salt and her heart ripped out in front of him, using his own powers. When Ronnie Raymond died in Identity Crisis, the Firestorm Matrix passed to Jason Rusch, a 17-year-old from Detroit with an abusive father, a dead mother, and dreams of escaping his circumstances. Writer Dan Jolly gave him a solo series and a love interest named Gehenna, who could also fuse with the Matrix. For a while, it seemed like Jason finally had a future that wasn't defined by trauma. Then came Blackest Night in 2009. Black Lantern rings resurrected dead heroes as zombies fueled by emotion, and Ronnie Raymond came back wrong, a corpse wearing Firestorm's face, hunting his living successor. The Black Lantern Firestorm found Jason and Gehenna together and absorbed Jason into the Matrix against his will, forcing him to watch helplessly from inside his own head. Ronnie used Jason's transmutation powers to transform Gehenna's body into salt. She died screaming while Jason was trapped inside the monster, using his own abilities to kill her. Ronnie ripped out her salt heart and absorbed Jason's grief to power the Black Lanterns. This follows a pattern in how girlfriends of heroes of color often exist specifically to be destroyed. The scene was designed for maximum cruelty. Jason's powers turned against him, his girlfriend murdered by his predecessor wearing his identity. Gehenna's purpose was never to be a character. Her purpose was to make Jason's suffering meaningful to readers who might not have cared otherwise. Jason survived. Ronnie came back to life properly afterward with no memory of what he'd done. The two eventually had to work together as co-Firestorms, quite the workplace dynamic when one of you turned the other's girlfriend into seasoning. Gehenna stayed dead because her purpose had been fulfilled. A black hero's girlfriend was fridged to give his white predecessor's resurrection emotional stakes. The math was brutal, and it told readers exactly what Gehenna was worth to DC's storytelling priorities. The pattern across all these stories isn't complicated. When DC needs someone to die for shock value, someone to erase when they're cleaning up an era, or someone to suffer so another character can have emotional stakes, they reach for the same roster every time. And the characters who get protected are never the ones who look like this.